Hey everybody, this is going to be a quick tutorial introducing Cinema 4D. Okay, so this is Cinema 4D. When you open it up, you'll be introduced to this viewport, which is in a perspective mode, and we can see that we have some lines here. We have red, that's the X, we have blue, that's the Z, and we have green, that is the Y. That is our three-dimensional plane. In order to navigate in here, why don't we first put in an object. If you click and hold down this palette, you can bring up a series of primitive objects. These are parametric objects, meaning that you can manipulate them and change them in different ways before working further into them. So in order to navigate, we have a series of buttons at the top right of the window. The first one is the move, and we can click and hold this down, and then you can move the viewport. Right, so we're not moving the object, we're just moving our view. Second one allows us to zoom in and out. Click and hold it down. You can zoom in and out of the object. Third one allows us to rotate around the object. Now, it will rotate around when it's highlighted. So now it's highlighted. If we click outside of it in the Objects Manager here, you can see that no more arrows show up. So in that case, if we want to move around it, we can click it. And then when we rotate, it will rotate around that object, the axis of that object. The last tab is a button that allows us to see all four views. So here we have perspective, top view, right view, and front view. So at any time, we could click that same button in that little window, and it will pop it open full view. We can always click back and go back to perspective. When we have an object here, we'll see it in the Objects Manager right up here. You can get a whole list of your objects that you're using. You also have attributes for each one of those objects down here. So in this case, we have the size parameters, and we have segments, and then we have a few more buttons that we can interact with. When you bring in an object from the parametric objects or the primitive object palette, you'll have a series of different ways of manipulating those in the Attributes Manager. So for example, I can change the scale by either going to my object buttons up here. So we have move, the move tool, we have the scale tool, we have the rotate tool. Move allows you to actually click one of the arrows and move the object, okay? Also, if you click the object itself, you can move it randomly, okay? Command Z to undo that. You also have these arrows that allow you to move along two different axes. So if I want to move it, if I want to keep it on the plane that it's on, but I want to be able to move it left and right, I can simply grab this tab and move it, and it will stay on its plane on the surface, but it will be able to move along the X and the Z axis. We can also scale here, so we can grab, when you grab a parametric object, you can grab the little flags. Now these little yellow flags that allow you to move them here. If you grab here and it's parametric, it will scale it, right? So it's not changing the proportions, but rather enlarging it by a percentage. You can also grab outside of here and do that as well. And then rotate allows you to simply rotate along an axis or freely, okay? Command Z, Command Z. And those are some ways that you can manipulate the object. Again, when we have this object selected in the Object Manager, down in the attributes, we can change it accordingly as well. So I can type things in like 50 by 50 by 50 will give us those dimensions that we're working with. We're working in inches here for right now. Additionally, we can change the segments, and this will become important later on when we start working with 3D modeling, manipulating segments, when we work with 3D printing. Those will be important. But just to show you what that means, if we go to Display and turn on Shading with Lines, and we increase the segments, let's do 10 by 10 by 10, you notice we get a whole lot more polygons making up this object. And that will become important later on. We can also, for this object, I'm just going to go back to our regular view, just shading. You can apply a fillet or a fillet, however you may say it. Click on it, and it will change each one of the edges, will give it some rounding. So in this case, we have 16-inch radius. Let's just change that to 3. So we have a very subtle rounded edge. And then the steps, it's at 5 right now. If I made it 1 step, we would see it's much more angular, right? So 1 step meaning only 1 polygon makes the difference. Let's look at that in the shading as well. Here we have 1. If we increase it, we have 2. We're starting to get a little more rounding. 3, even more. 4, 5. So you can see how that the more segments, the more curvature we're getting. So again, any time you have a parametric object, check it out in the Attributes Manager to see what sort of additions you can do to it. Not so much with a cube, but certainly other objects like cone, for example. Move that guy out of the way. You can change orientation. So here we have, it's oriented along the plus y, which is positive y. If you go plus x, it will go along that axis, or plus z along the other axis. And of course, negative, it goes the other way. So negative z goes that direction, and then negative y would be going straight down. So it's great to be able to work with objects that you can change quickly the orientation, and notice the axis changes. So it's still pointing up along the y, which is also very helpful sometimes. All right, so when we're working with objects, we may just want to stack and build, right? So you can just simply place objects in accordance with one another. It's always helpful to look at multiple views, right? So we can see above, and we can orient that maybe directly in the middle of this object, right? That becomes helpful when we're trying to lay things out. We can also copy and paste. So for example, I can take the cone, Command C, Command V. We won't see anything that happens right away because we have to move it. So it'll place it right in the exact same position. So notice that when you're starting to play around with copy and paste, I might just change orientation here. This, a bit more complicated object. So here I'm starting to build some sort of trophy. But anyway, we can definitely work with all of these objects, stacking them in different combinations. Now, if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to scale this whole thing down, you could group the objects. So if we select them all, we can go to Objects, and we can go to Group, and that will make what's called a null. Null is sort of like a folder that holds everything in here, and anything you do to the null affects the children. It's sort of like a child-parent situation. The null becomes the parent, the objects become the children. You can always go to them and manipulate them individually. So I could always go to this and scale it up or down. You can see that. Or I can go to the null, and I can scale the whole thing, right? So in this becomes really helpful because let's say we wanted to slightly rotate it, right? So instead of having to rotate each object, we just rotate one of the objects, right? So here we have this. Maybe we'll give it a cylindrical base. Scale this down, make it wider. And now I've made some sort of, I'll bring this and put in the null as well. And now here's my corporate logo trophy. All right, so again, working with primitive objects, we can scale them, we can rotate them, we can combine them together in different groups. One final thing I'll show you, when we're working with it in this editor view, we can also quickly make a rendering to see what it looked like if we wanted to render out as a MOV or a MP4 or a JPEG or a PNG. This button right here, render view. Click on that, I can see it at this darkened void. Just to give it a quick, I like to do this to give it a quick overview. If we click on this button here, it gives you a whole different palette for some environments. I'm going to add a physical sky, okay? I'm also going to go here and just add a floor, all right? And I'm going to take my null and bring it up because it's underneath the floor. And then I'm just going to rotate around till I get a nice sunny view. Something like this looks pretty good. All right, and hit render again. And now we can see this not that well. So let's give it a material. I'm just going to go down here. This is the materials palette. Hit create new material, not PBR material. double click this, go to color, and let's just make this kind of a bright pink, why not? Okay, place this on the object, on the null actually. There we go, and let's render that out. All right, now I've got some sort of pink corporate trophy in space. I've built it using primitive objects, changing the parameters, rotating things around, grouping them together for my first 3D model. So I hope this gives you a basic insight into Cinema 4D. That's all for now. Take care, be well.